All right. We are live. Welcome, everybody in the chat there. See Obsidian, Phoenix, and T Fliprex. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining. We'll see how this goes. Yeah, coffee's a good thing. I would have had some coffee tonight, but did not sleep well last night, so I figured I'd give my system a break. We'll see how that goes. All right, we'll get this thing going here. Good evening and welcome to Stygian Articles presented by the Lovecraft Tapes podcast. I am Jeremy, keeper of arcane lore, and tonight I'm going to read you two scary stories. Full disclosure, I do not consider myself a professional narrator, so I'm bound to make some mistakes along the way. I'm hoping you'll be able to ignore any hiccups and just enjoy these tales of terror. Please note, listener discretion is advised. The scary stories I read and write will sometimes contain extreme horror, violence, language, and other adult themes. Watch and listen at your own risk. And I think tonight we're going to be pretty tame, so we'll see. Ready, Mama Cryptid? What's up? Hello, Beyond Peril. Justin Churu. All right, we begin our first tale. From Beyond by H.P. Lovecraft. Take a little sip here. Horrible beyond conception was the change which had taken place in my best friend, Crawford Tillinghast. I had not seen him since that day, 2 months and a half before, when he had told me toward what goal his physical and metaphysical researches were leading. When he had answered my awed and almost frightened remonstrances, I always hate that word, remonstrances, by driving me from his laboratory and his house in a burst of fanatical rage. I had known that he now remained mostly shut in the attic laboratory with that accursed electrical machine, eating little and excluding even the servants, but I had not thought that a brief period of 10 weeks could so alter and disfigure any human creature. It is not pleasant to see a stout man suddenly grown thin, and it is even worse when the baggy skin becomes yellowed or grayed, the eyes sunken, circled, and uncannily glowing, the forehead veined and corrugated, and the hands tremulous and twitching. And if added to this there be a repellent unkemptness, a wild disorder of dress, a bushiness of dark hair white at the roots, and an unchecked growth of pure white beard on a face once clean shaven, the cumulative effect is quite shocking. But such was the aspect of Crawford Tillinghast on the night his half-coherent message brought me to his door after my weeks of exile. Such the spectre that trembled as it admitted me, candle in hand, and glanced furtively over its shoulder as if fearful of unseen things in the ancient lonely house set back from Benevolent Street. That Crawford Tillinghast should have ever studied science and philosophy was a mistake. These things should be left to the frigid and impersonal investigator, for they offer two equally tragic alternatives to the man of feeling and action: despair if he fail in his quest, and terrors unutterable and unimaginable if he succeed. Tillinghast had once been the prey of failure, solitary, and melancholy, but now I knew, with nauseating fears of my own, that he was the prey of success. I had indeed warned him 10 weeks before, when he burst forth with his tale of what he felt himself about to discover. He had been flushed and excited then, talking in a high and unnatural, though always pedantic voice. What we do know, he had said, of the world and the universe about us. I'll start that again. What do we know, he had said, of the world and the universe about us? Our means of receiving impressions are absurdly few, and our notions of surrounding objects infinitely narrow. We see things only as we are constructed to see them, and can gain no idea of their absolute nature. With five feeble senses, we pretend to comprehend the boundlessly complex cosmos. Yet other beings with a wider, stronger, or different range of senses might not only see very differently the things we see, but might see and study whole worlds of matter, energy, and life, which lie close at hand, yet can never be detected with the senses we have. I have always believed that such strange, inaccessible worlds exist at our very elbows, and now I believe I have found a way to break down the barriers. I am not joking. Within 24 hours, that machine near the table will generate waves acting on unrecognized sense organs that exist in us as atrophied or rudimentary vestiges. Those waves will open up to us many vistas unknown to man, and several unknown to anything we consider organic life. We shall see that at which dogs howl in the dark, and that at which cats prick up their ears after midnight. We shall see these things, and other things which no breathing creature has yet seen. We shall overleap time, space, and dimensions, and without bodily motion peer to the bottom of creation. When Tillinghast had said these things, I remonstrated, for I knew him well enough to be frightened rather than amused. But he was a fanatic, and drove me from the house. Now he was no less a fanatic, but his desire to speak had conquered his resentment, and he had written me imperatively in a hand I could scarcely recognize. As I entered the abode of the friend so suddenly metamorphosed to a shivering gargoyle, I became infected with the terror which seemed stalking in all the shadows. The words and beliefs expressed 10 weeks before seemed bodied forth in the shadows, in the darkness beyond the small circle of candlelight, and I sickened at the hollow, altered voice of my host. I wished the servants were about, and did not like it when he said they had all left 3 days previously. It seemed strange that old Gregory, at least, should desert his master without telling as tried a friend as I. It was he who had given me all the information I had of Tillinghast after I was repulsed in rage. Yet I soon subordinated all my fears to my growing curiosity and fascination. Just what Crawford Tillinghast now wished of me, I could only guess, but that he had some stupendous secret or discovery to impart, I could not doubt. Before I had protested at his unnatural pryings into the unthinkable. Now that he had evidently succeeded to some degree, I almost shared his spirit, terrible though the cost of victory appeared. Up through the dark emptiness of the house, I followed the bobbing candle in the hand of this shaking parody on man. The electricity seemed to be turned off, and when I asked my guide, he said it was for a definite reason. It would be too much. I would not dare, he continued to mutter. I especially noted his new habit of muttering, for it was not like him to talk to himself. We entered the laboratory in the attic, and I observed that detestable electrical machine, glowing with a sickly, sinister violet luminosity. It was connected with a powerful chemical battery, but seemed to be receiving no current, for I recall that in its experimental stage it had sputtered and purred when in action. In reply to my question, Tillinghast mumbled that this permanent glow was not electrical in any sense that I could understand. He now seated me near the machine so that it was on my right, and turned a switch somewhere below the crowning cluster of glass bulbs. The usual sputtering began, turned to a whine, and terminated in a drone so soft as to suggest a return to silence. Meanwhile, the luminosity increased, waned again, then assumed a pale ochre color, or blend of colors, which I could neither place nor describe. Tillinghast had been watching me and noted my puzzled expression. "Do you know what this is?" he whispered. "That is ultraviolet." He chuckled oddly at my surprise. "You thought ultraviolet was invisible, and so it is. But you can see that and many other invisible things now. Listen to me. The waves from that thing are waking 1,000 sleeping senses in us. Senses which we inherit from eons of evolution from the state of detached electrons to the state of organic humanity. I have seen truth, and I intend to shew it to you. Do you wonder how it will seem? I will tell you." Here, Tillinghast seated himself directly opposite me, blowing out his candle and staring hideously into my eyes. "Your existing sense organs, ears first, I think, will pick up many of the impressions, for they are closely connected with the dormant organs. Then there will be others. You have heard of the pineal gland. I laugh at the shadow endocrinologist, fellow dupe and fellow parvenu of the Freudian. That gland is the great sense organ of organs, I have found out. It is like sight in the end, and transmits visual pictures to the brain. If you are normal, that is the way you ought to get most of it. I mean, get most of the evidence from beyond." I looked about the immense attic room with the sloping south wall, dimly lit by rays which the everyday eye cannot see. The far corners were all shadows, and the whole place took on a hazy unreality which obscured its nature and invited the imagination to symbolism and phantasm. During the interval that Tillinghast was silent, I fancied myself in some vast and incredible temple of long dead gods, some vague edifice of innumerable black stone columns reaching up from a floor of damp slabs to a cloudy height beyond the range of my vision. The picture was very vivid for a while, but gradually gave way to a more horrible conception, that of utter, absolute solitude in infinite, sightless, soundless space. There seemed to be a void and nothing more, and I felt a childish fear which prompted me to draw from my hip pocket the revolver I always carried after dark since the night I was held up in East Providence. Then, from the farthermost regions of remoteness, the sound softly glided into existence. It was infinitely faint, subtly vibrant, and unmistakably musical, but held a quality of surpassing wildness which made its impact feel like a delicate torture of my whole body. I felt sensations like those one feel I felt sensation like those one feels when accidentally scratching ground glass. Simultaneously, there developed something like a cold draft, which apparently swept past me from the direction of the distant sound. As I waited breathlessly, I perceived that both sound and wind were increasing, the effect being to give me an odd notion of myself as tied to a pair of rails in the path of a gigantic approaching locomotive. I began to speak to Tillinghast, and as I did so, the unusual impressions abruptly vanished. I saw only the man, the glowing machine, and the dim apartment. Tillinghast was grinning repulsively at the revolver which I had almost unconsciously drawn, but from his expression I was sure he had seen and heard as much as I, if not a great deal more. I whispered what I had experienced, and he bade me to remain as quiet and receptive as possible. "Don't move," he cautioned, "for in these rays we are able to be seen as well as to see. I told you the servants left, but I didn't tell you how. It was that thick-witted housekeeper. She turned on the lights downstairs after I had warned her not to, and the wires picked up sympathetic vibrations. It must have been frightful. I could hear the screams up here in spite of all I was seeing and hearing from another direction. And later, it was rather awful to find those empty heaps of clothes around the house. Mrs. Updike's clothes were close to the front hall switch. That's how I knew she did it. It got them all. But so long as we don't move, we're fairly safe. Remember, we're dealing with a hideous world in which we are practically helpless. Keep still." The combined shock of the revelation and of the abrupt command gave me a kind of paralysis, and in my terror my mind again opened to the impressions coming from what Tillinghast called beyond. I was now in a vortex of sound and motion, with confused pictures before my eyes. I saw the blurred outlines of the room, but from some point in space there seemed to be pouring a seething column of unrecognizable shapes or clouds, penetrating the solid roof at a point ahead and to the right of me. Then I glimpsed the temple-like effect again, but this time the pillars reached up into an aerial ocean of light, which sent down one blinding beam along the path of the cloudy column I had seen before. After that, the scene was almost wholly kaleidoscopic, and in the jumble of sights, sounds, and unidentified sense impressions, I felt that I was about to dissolve or in some way lose the solid form. One definite flash I shall always remember. I seemed for an instant to behold a patch of strange night sky filled with shining revolving spheres, and as it receded I saw that the glowing suns formed a constellation or galaxy of settled shape, this shape being the distorted face of Crawford Tillinghast. At another time I felt the huge animate things brushing past me, and occasionally walking or drifting through my supposedly solid body. And I thought Tillinghast look at and I saw Tillinghast look at them as though his better trained senses could catch them visually. I recalled what he had said of the pineal gland and wondered what he saw with this preternatural eye. Suddenly, I myself became possessed of a kind of augmented sight. Over and above the luminous and shadowy chaos arose a picture which, though vague, held the elements of consistency and permanence. It was indeed somewhat familiar, for the unusual part was superimposed upon the usual terrestrial scene, much as a cinema view may be thrown upon the painted curtain of a theater. I saw the attic laboratory, the electrical machine, and the unsightly form of Tillinghast opposite me. But of all the space unoccupied by familiar material objects, not one particle was vacant. Indescribable shapes, both alive and otherwise, were mixed in disgusting disarray, and close to every known thing were whole worlds of alien, unknown entities. It likewise seemed that all the known things entered into the composition of other unknown things, and vice versa. Foremost among the living objects were great inky jellyfish monstrosity, which flabbily quivered in harmony with the vibrations from the machine. They were present in loathsome profusion, and I saw to my horror that they overlapped, that they were semi-fluid and capable of passing through one another and through what we know as solids. These things were never still, but seemed ever floating about with some malignant purpose. Sometimes they appeared to devour one another, the attacker launching itself at its victim and instantaneously obliterating the latter from sight. Shudderingly, I felt that I knew what had obliterated the unfortunate servants, and could not exclude the things from my mind as I strove to observe other properties of the newly visible world that lies unseen around us. But Tillinghast had been watching me, and was speaking. You see them? You see them. You see the things that float and flop about you and through you every moment of your life. You see the creatures that form what men call the pure air and the blue sky. Have I not succeeded in breaking down the barrier? Have I not shown you the worlds that no other living men have seen? I heard him scream through the horrible chaos, and looked at the wild face thrust so offensively close to mine. His eyes were pits of flame, and they glared at me with what I now saw was overwhelming hatred. The machine droned detestably. You think those floundering things wiped out the servants? Fool, they are harmless. But the servants are gone, aren't they? You tried to stop me. You discouraged me when I needed every drop of encouragement I could get. You were afraid of the cosmic truth, you damn coward, but now I've got you. What swept up the servants? What made them scream so loud? Don't know, huh? You'll know soon enough. Look at me. Listen to what I say. Do you suppose there are really any such things as time and magnitude? Do you fancy there are such things as form and matter? I tell you, I have struck depths that your little brain can't picture. I have seen beyond the bounds of infinity and drawn down demons from the stars. I have harnessed the shadows that stride from world to sow death and madness. Space belongs to me, do you hear? Things are hunting me now, the things that devour and dissolve, but I know how to elude them. It is you they will get, as they got the servants. Stirring, dear sir? I told you it was dangerous to move. I have saved you so far by telling you to keep still, saved you to see more sights and to listen to me. If you had moved, they would have been at you long ago. Don't worry, they won't hurt you. They didn't hurt the servants. It was seeing that made the poor devils scream so. My pets are not pretty, for they come out of the places where aesthetic standards are very different. Disintegration is quite painless, I assure you, but I want you to see them. I almost saw them, but I knew how to stop. You are not curious? I always knew you were no scientist. Trembling, huh? Trembling with anxiety to see the ultimate things I have discovered? Why don't you move then? Tired? Well, don't worry, my friend, for they are coming. Look, look, curse you, look! It's just over your left shoulder. What remains to be told is very brief and may be familiar to you from the newspaper accounts. The police heard a shot in the old Tillinghast house and found us there, Tillinghast dead and me unconscious. They arrested me because the revolver was in my hand, but released me in 3 hours after they found it was apoplexy which had finished Tillinghast, and saw that my shot had been directed at the noxious machine which now lay hopelessly shattered on the laboratory floor. I did not tell very much of what I had seen, for I had feared the coroner would be skeptical. But from the evasive outline I did give, the doctor told me that I had undoubtedly been hypnotized by the vindictive and homicidal madman. I wish I could believe that, doctor. It would help my shaky nerves if I could dismiss what I now have to think of the air and the sky about and above me. I never feel alone or comfortable, and a hideous sense of pursuit sometimes comes chillingly on me when I am weary. What prevents me from believing the doctor is this one simple fact that the police never found the bodies of those servants whom they say Crawford and Tillinghast murdered. All right, that's one down. Sorry for all the flubs. I guess I'm a little out of practice. Plus, remonstrate and apoplexy and all of those Lovecraftian words just, roll off the tongue. I really like that one. If it's interesting that From Beyond is such a short tale, um, and yet Stuart Gordon was able to expand that into a full-length feature, and still capture much of the horror that's inherent in what is essentially a unreliable narrator tale. I enjoyed that. Plus, it's science fiction. All right, guys, let's move on to our second tale, and it is entitled The Fall, written by me. All right. I don't think I have apoplexy in this one, so that'll be a plus. John walked onto his back porch, breathing deeply of the crisp October air. He pulled out a cigarette and lit up. The plumes of smoke mingled with the white clouds of his breath until both were indistinguishable. Frost tipped the lawn, blades of grass stiff in the morning sunshine. A low mist hovered over the lake, creating the illusion of warmth where none would be until next June. Hugging his mug of coffee, he leaned against the railing and watched the shoreline. Up here in northern Michigan, a cold snap could come at any time. They'd been lucky so far, even sailed a final lap around the lake last Sunday. This weekend, they'd have to pull up the dock and hoist the boat out of the water. He wasn't looking forward to all that work, pulling the wooden platform from the muck and setting it ashore. Maybe he'd get his brother-in-law to lend a hand. A noise drew his attention. It came from the side of the house, a scuttling sound followed by a thud, like spiders falling from the sky. Cautiously, he crept to the edge of the porch and peered around the corner. For a moment, he noticed nothing out of the ordinary. Between his property and his neighbor's house lay a narrow strip of ground. There was an unspoken rule about not storing anything here, keeping it clear for kids to play. Kimmy, his daughter, used to build mud pies with other children. That was many years ago, though. She would be 11 years old come this spring. John smiled as he thought of her now, fast asleep upstairs. Something caught his eye. A fluttering movement above in the branches of the tall birch which grew directly on the property line, followed by that same scuttling sound. He watched as a single leaf spiraled to the ground where it landed with a soft thud. John smiled. Fall had definitely arrived. He set his coffee cup down on the railing and stood under the tree. Overhead, another leaf surrendered its tenuous grasp on the wood, followed by another, then another. In moments, a rain shower of dying leaves floated to the earth, cascading down upon John. He laughed. It was like being a kid again, playing in some old pile of raked leaves. Only this felt more magical, like he'd been chosen somehow to witness this miracle of life winding down in preparation for next season's eventual renewal. When it was over, he stood in the middle of a puddle of deceased foliage, and the birch lay completely bare. He walked reluctantly back to the porch, still brimming with wonderment. That's why he'd moved out here from the suburbs in the first place. He and his family loved nature. They fished as much as they could, went hiking every weekend, and enjoyed the lake with friends every chance they got. No exhaust fumes, no long commute. Working from home was a dream come true for him. He paused while sipping his brew. A familiar sound drifted across the air. That's right. Another birch grew down by the edge of the water. He could spot it from here, and sure enough, a couple leaves had just launched themselves from their nesting places. It was all he could do not to run down toward the lake. Again, he stood beneath the majestic birch, with its bark peeling away in white strips that looked like albino scabs, and witnessed the leaves commence their suicide leaps. They collected around him, sad reminders of warm days long past. When it was over, John gave a satisfied sigh and walked back to the porch. He'd gone a few steps when he heard an even louder thud directly behind him. Whirling around, slightly off balance, he gaped at the large bough lying on the ground. It had missed his head by about a foot. He looked up at the oak tree which grew next to the birch, but couldn't even tell from where the branch had detached. The wind picked up, and the tree groaned eerily, a creaking, forlorn sigh. Unsteadily, he took a step backward. Something moved on his left. He turned to see one of the smaller trees in his neighbor yard topple over in slow motion. It crashed to the ground, full head of leaves shaking in disbelief. John took another step toward the house. Movement all around. The air filled with the sounds of healthy roots wrenched from the ground and splintering wood that seemed like screams. John ran back to the porch, dodging a descending pine and leaping over a fallen fir. Everything is dying, he thought frantically. What's happening? He got to the porch and stood there, breathing hard, watching tree after tree collapse as if knocked down by some unseen giant hand all around the lake. A cacophony of shattered wood, uprooted earth, and crashing foliage echoed across the water. The horizon fell. His first thought was to call the DNR. Something was happening to the ecosystem. Exactly what, he had no idea. He'd never seen, in all of nature, anything quite like this. He went inside to get his cell phone. No signal. That was odd. Though they lived in a rural area, he selected this carrier specifically because he could get a good connection to their tower. Perplexed, He switched on the television to see if maybe the local news had picked up anything. White noise. The same from his radio. "Don't panic," he whispered, and the uneven tone of his own voice scared him. In his head, visions of terrorist attacks surfaced. Was this some kind of biological fallout? Was he, even now, being contaminated? He thought of those dead leaves falling over him, caressing his upturned face. No need to wake the wife and kid. Not yet. No use scaring them until he had a better idea of what was happening. The neighbor. He might know. John went out the side entrance and sprinted to the house next door. Banged on the frame. No answer. Knocked again, more loudly. They were usually up way before John. "Bill?" He called out and tried the door. It opened. "Bill, you okay?" He went from room to room calling out his neighbor's name. Nobody answered, and he found no one in the house. The TV had been left on, showing the same blank static as his set. On the kitchen table, a half mug of coffee sat cooling. As he walked back to his house, a popping noise sounded overhead. The porch light went out. He went inside to find the electricity off. A quick check of the breaker box found no blown fuses. John sighed. No choice now but to wake his family and head into town, maybe even get a hotel room until the authorities could figure out what the hell was happening here. He walked upstairs. Both bedrooms were empty. He stood over his daughter's bed, the SpongeBob SquarePants blanket pulled up but messy and ruffled, as if she'd been there only moments before, or still there and somehow invisible. John slipped his hand under the covers and recoiled when he felt her warmth still on the sheets. Stumbling backwards, he called out her name. "Kimmy?" His voice sounded like a plaintive seagull looking for scraps on a deserted beach. In his own bed, where his wife had slept beside him less than a half an hour ago, he found her wedding ring between the pillows. "Help. I need help," he thought. "Get the police, form a search party. They've been kidnapped. That's it." He knew his mind had jumped the track, but was unable to curb the escalating panic. Walking mechanically to the garage, he found both vehicles still there. He tried the overhead door opener, but the electricity was still out. Grunting, he opened the door manually. The chill morning air flooded into the garage. He got into his truck and turned the ignition. Nothing. No click of the solenoid, no dashboard lights. Though he already knew the answer, he tried his wife's car. Same result. Stone dead. He began walking to town, 3 miles away. No birds chirped, no squirrels scampered. Nothing stirred on the road. On either side, fallen trees lay like wounded soldiers. The only sound came from John's shoes on the dirt track. He passed other houses with dark windows staring at him like blank eyes. With each step, his unease grew. He started to run. In town, the empty buildings seemed to lean over the deserted streets. John walked in and out of the shops, seeing no one, hearing nothing. He sat at an intersection under a blank traffic light and began to cry. His tears spattered to the cement, disappeared. John blinked, squinted. The tears were literally disappearing as they hit the ground. He wiped his face and got to his feet. It was happening. He could feel it. He held his hand up to the sunlight and discovered he could see right through the flesh. Even as he watched, his fingers became less distinct, almost ghostly. Something tickled his face. He reached up to brush it away and brought back a handful of hair. His scalp tingled as more of his hair fluttered to the ground and began to puddle around his shoes. I'm joining them, he thought. I'm crossing over. A sudden joy blossomed in his chest. No more dialysis, no more catheter, no more probing hypodermics in the middle of the night from some faceless nurse who smells like Listerine. No more wailing wife or crying daughter. No more overdue electric bill. No more handiwork around the house. No more noisy neighbors or barking dogs or cups of coffee on the porch in the morning air. He could sense his family gathered around his bed in the cancer ward. He could hear the rattle of his own ravaged lungs as they turned off the machines that pumped in oxygen, tasting nothing like the cool, sweet air that swept off the lake in October. John felt himself tipping over like a tree pushed by some unseen hand. Fall was here at last. All right. That is The Fall. A little something to lift your spirits, right? And that's it for tonight's Stygian Articles. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed these scary stories, please visit STYGIANarticles.com for more of my dark fiction and lovecrafttapes.com for fresh episodes of our Call of Cthulhu actual play podcast. I am Jeremy, your keeper of arcane lore, wishing you a pleasant evening. Good night. All right, guys, thank you for following along in the chat. Appreciate that. Hope you enjoyed a couple tales of creepiness. And I know we're back next Wednesday with our regular episode of recording the podcast. So we'll get back to that. And I'll probably be doing more of these again. If you enjoyed them, let me know. And I'll keep it up as best I can. Have a good night, guys. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.